Great. David, over to you.
So I'm from another country as well, albeit a Sassenach in Scotland. I can tell partly a personal story and partly an institutional story. And my slides are what my colleague Liz van der Meer would have given, or my former Director of Social Responsibility and Sustainability, Dave Gorman, would have given. So this is the slide pack. I've not made my own slides, so I'll talk against this to a certain extent a little bit. I went to Edinburgh to study architecture, joined the University of Edinburgh as, I think that's okay, as energy manager in 1989. There were 10,500 students then. There are 35,000 students there now, 40% of whom are from overseas. So we've got some scale of change. Here you are, David. You're the energy manager. I've got this cupboard you can sit in and get on and save the energy. It was quite extraordinary experience and was one of the first energy managers as such, as opposed to being an electrical engineer told to buy the energy. And I've been very, very lucky in pushing open door at Edinburgh through that career. And I'm concerned, and I think my note to leave with you is that I'm really concerned that the academic process nearly always looks at the barriers to everything, and then you can go to the solutions. My view is, and what I have observed in my career, is that it's when you have leadership that stuff changes. When you've got consistent leadership, and of course this is a good and a bad thing. The drivers are very clear. They include all the science of climate change. They include the economics of it, the opportunity, the practically halving of the unit costs of delivered energy from solar, from land-based wind turbines. But also in our case, this is in front of our finance department, this is the students drawing a red line saying they want fossil fuel divestment. So there is a social pressure as well. Now, which of these is actually driving? Which has got the most effective driver? In 1990, I introduced and the university adopted an energy strategy. This was to invest not 10%, which the audit commission recommended should be spent of energy spend on energy efficiency investments. So in the 80s, they had studied other public bodies, and they said 10% of your energy spend could and should be invested in energy efficiency improvements. We bid for 5%, which in 2003 was changed to between 5 and 10%. We would monitor and measure our energy consumption and track it. They were the two. There was a third, but so I've been in the game a long time, and I observe that always you have to talk the economic benefit to senior managers, because that's the rubric that they're accustomed to. But increasingly, I've seen the other two of the triple bottom line being accepted as being co-benefits as well. So as long as you're always speaking and using the economic aspects, so that ticks that box. You can also increasingly talk about the contribution to well-being, the contribution to the ecological address. And I observed that, and if I remember talking to colleagues in another university who were saying, well, where do you start on this journey? And I remember very clearly talking about, speak to the senior managers about risk management. There are specific risks about fuel prices changing and so on. But there are also, and as an example of that, as you all know, the gas price is ridiculously low now. It was only in 2001 that similarly the gas price was in an unsustainably low price in a trough. That was the year we put in our first combined heat and power station at Pollock-Halls residence. The next year, gas price went up 40%. The year following that, it went up 60%. So we're in a false lull at the moment, where the real cost of resources is not being reflected in the market price. So if I'll swap between these the formal presentation. We had a utilities policy in 2003, which was to formalise our aspiration to have BREEAM excellent for all new buildings and BREEAM very good for all refurbishments, and to continue and extend that 5% investment up to 10%. Now, what's quite interesting, so you have to get it adopted that there's that allocation of resources, and that meant that the vice principal is responsible for the estate budget, then has, well, there's a heading, and so we established a new a new account code 4305, which was energy efficiency. There hadn't been an account code for energy efficiency spend before. So there are institutional mechanisms you have to start introducing. In this fourth now, then in 2010 to 2020, we made a climate action plan, which was very similar to the carbon management plans that all the other universities helped by the Carbon Trust made. This looked at what the Committee on Climate Change, the UK Committee on Climate Change, advised Scotland, the Scottish Government, could be achieved, which was a 29% reduction by 2020. We're not going to make that. So halfway through that 2010 to 2020 programme, which was the last sort of major piece of strategic work that I was deeply involved in, the university has led by Dave Gorman, who's the Director of Social Responsibility and Sustainability, has evolved this set of targets, which now are in the climate strategy, and you can see the little copies of the pale blue on the desk. So I've mentioned the rate of increase, so we've got some relative targets, one relative target, which is all associated with the volume of turnover and the expansion of the university. So we will reduce that substantially, halve that by 2025. In the same year that the steady growth, we will have brought back down to the baseline year of 2007-8. But we set this a very ambitious 20 by 40. Dave's the first to say he's not quite sure how we're going to get there. So it's not one of these things that's got all the bits in place. He's placed it back as a challenge, and the senior management have accepted it as a challenge, as an intellectual, as a research challenge, that the university has to contribute into this. And so this will be a partnership. It's not just an estates thing any longer. This is too big for estates. That's what the Director of Estates said to me when in 2011, 2012 we started discussion and put papers up to Senior Management Group. When social responsibility was coming in, this is too big for estates. We're pushing you out. We're establishing a new department for social responsibility and sustainability. This is led very much by the then senior, our overboss, Director of Corporate Services, and the Senior Vice Principal. Establishing that department out of estates, from the Support Services Department, it becomes a slightly intermediate department, not so easy to categorise, engaging with 300 academic colleagues. So, here's some of the the challenges. This is the backdrop against which we're operating. A hugely successful global university. So in our annual accounts last year for 2015, it's up to nearly $1 billion turnover and so on. But what's interesting is that the Director of Finance, recognizing other financial reporting requirements, has now got 8 pages on social responsibility and sustainability, along with the financial review and the strategy and value model. So it's got more pages on social responsibility and sustainability in the annual review and the back with all the finances. This is a turnaround. This is a slow progress where it's recognized as a must-have, a must report, and so on. You can see just in these last 10 years or so, these changes, really massive. And this makes it very difficult to reflect the funding councils or the government's expectations that we would make absolute reductions. And you can see back to our baseline year of 2007-8, when we did achieve in the first years some reductions. I have to say that the majority of the combined heat and power was installed in 2002, 3, 4 and 5. And so we've got an 8,500 ton reduction in the 90s. And so, sorry, in the noughties. And what we've got here is electricity, the red, blue is the gas, and you'll see that's been increasing slightly. Bought electricity reducing. This is because we're generating more and more of our power requirements on site and with the low carbon technology. And then the next one after that is transport. Now this is because we're a global university. We're reaching out, we're collaborating with people all across the globe. Waste is a small sliver. Other fuels, transport related and owned vehicles, still pretty slim, and water very small. So we've done a lot we've invested £30 million in CHP by the end of this year, a 5th power station that were installed, 2 of them tri-generation, active cooling as well as heating. And of just over the last 7 years, a greater amount of climate-related research. So that even though we're an ancient sort of 19th century, well, it's 400 years old now, but very, very institutionally bound with very traditional values and so on, still we have been catching some of this research. In 2003, again, I showed the picture of students being revolting, as our former chief security officer said, well, that's what they're there for, when he was sort of making sure they weren't breaking up the place and so on. In 2003, People and Planet and others bid for an ethical investment policy for the university's endowment fund, which was then 150 million or something. It's now £300 million. And over the ensuing years, we've progressively been advised and divested from tobacco when the medics said, please get out of tobacco and things like that. And so when the fossil fuel agenda, and this is when I first met Aaron, divest initiatives hit the campus, there was already a very low level, only Shell, Rio Tinto Zinc and so on. And in the last 3 years, then we've divested 90%, well, last 10 years, sorry, 8 years, 90% of that diminished already. So stuff is happening. That's quite interesting. And this is an institution which wouldn't want to be taking any leadership roles in any of these particular issues. So by progressive edging in. Now, these are the challenge we've got, which is growth. We've got growth in student numbers. We've got growth in buildings, from about 400 to 600,000 square meters. We're talking a really serious, and they're moving from 19th century laboratories where you had a skylight with an expeller in it to take the fumes away to, 15 air changes per hour going through some laboratories and so on. All of this, if we're not careful, leads to climate emissions. And this is not super easy to see, but what we're looking at there is the turnover intensity, which what you can show as a reducing thing, not too difficult. And again, these others are, I don't think, very successful things. Now, then you're looking at the traditional, the way of modelling, the way the carbon management plans and so on, all talk about business as usual, about 0.7% growth, typically, blah, blah, blah. This is our baseline, which we're already above at the present time. Taking into account decarbonisation of the grid, which is already happening at a great rate, then this is what will be happening. It's not to do with the university's actions, and then these are the variability on the UK grid factor. I think Scotland will probably decarbonise its grid well before then, and this is the challenge as to how do we achieve that actually to hit down and reduce by 2025. So this is 2015, this is 2025. This is just predicting as we go along business as usual. And you'll see the impact, because of course it's very much more difficult for the aviation industry to decarbonise. It's all travel, but it's overwhelmingly aviation. As an active research-led university, collaboration across the board is essential. We have shrunk away and reduced, and Paul, in comment, in discussion with me before, has always said, look, you've got to look at these two to shrink these more, so reduce the demand more and more. Now these are some of the ways that the build-up of that reduction, that reduction is the 17,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide, which is hoped to achieve the pathway to 2025, the intermediate, new intermediate challenge. And you can see these are elements reducing flight growth, fuel switching to electric vehicles and so on, and different changes. But this here, the 10,000 tonnes explored land-based carbon offsetting, this is the great unknown. And so whether we get sleeved contracts with power purchase agreements, with land-based turbines where we invest in and therefore can get the carbon credits for that. All of these things, the Director of Finance is always eyeing up, couldn't we buy this forest and then we would get the carbon credits for that and so on. It's quite interesting that we've moved from the Director of Finance being an obstacle, no, you couldn't possibly, to being somebody who is chairing the renewable energy working group, which is now starting to look at how do we deliver these ambitious targets. And so he's very, very much looking at how we can achieve these. What's difficult to do is to get things out of the estates bubble, out of the back office. You keep on hauling the trash, or we'll do the serious stuff, said the vice principal for the medical school. And it's getting this idea of a whole institution approach and getting the research and learning as part of it. And so our view is that it's only when we're actually addressing, and it's a bit like you spoke, Lisa, about having to address things on a number of different levels. Yes, there's space use and there's all this estate stuff. But this is actually institutional research and so on into behavior and policy and behavior change are all part of a holistic approach that's necessary. So these are our targets. The stretch target, which I think is important, it's a bit like the Scottish Government are saying, yes, we've got these stretch targets. That then permits the investment industry to come into Scotland. That's where wind farm companies are comfortable operating, because they can sense institutional support. And this is where some research, the so-called ISM, the individual, the social, which is everybody around me, and the material ISM toolkit, I think is something which is a a DEFRA and a Scottish Government funded piece of research, is something that I think we need to be aware of, is that we need to be achieving change at all these different levels. So these are some of the mechanisms that our department, my department, which is the orange folder on threefold leaflet there, and particularly the Sustainable Campus Fund. It's mimicking what's happened at Harvard for some time, and this is the offer. So this is part of the presentation Dave gives to schools when he's going around to see schools. This is how we can help. You can bid for very easily, simply register online your interest. You can get a simple application pack within weeks, literally. It used to take a whole bloody year for somebody to bring forward an idea and so on. So actually making it straightforward and easy, a monthly meeting of the Utilities Working Group, the Director of Estates, Director of Social Responsibility and the Director of Finance, and then review it, then you can get it approved. And so we're on to the third tranche of these. This gets a whole different way of thinking. This is a can-do attitude. This is starting to build a momentum, which is really, really helpful. So it started with, in 2010 to 2020, a social responsibility and sustainability strategy. So this gave us the headroom. Then we had the Climate Action Plan, which has been revised by this new climate strategy. Establishing the department was, I think, the main game changer for Edinburgh. But it has been built on, vice principals at every level, leadership right through the years. When a vice principal left a gap, there wasn't a sustainability committee for a while. It was a sustainability and environmental advisory group for a while. It's now a social responsibility and sustainability committee now. It's a formal committee of the university, not just an advisory group. These are the sort of changes that over time you're able to achieve. I'll stop there. Great.